She'd found her mother lying in a pool of blood.
Who felt cheated at life.
I want everybody to stop treating everybody like they're on their shoe.
A very dangerous man who could pass in society quietly underground until triggered.
He posted that chilling message.
Watch out for my next magic trick.
He was the angel of death.
On the stunning Sussex coastline lies the seaside town of Eastbourne.
Eastbourne has a traditional view that it's a retirement town where not a lot happens, really.
And it's just really nice and it's friendly. You feel, on the whole, quite safe.
There's nice restaurants, cafes. It's lovely in the summer. It's quite magical in some ways. We love it.
I think there is quite a good neighbourhood vibe here and people know each other.
It's got a really tight-knit feel to it. There's a really good community spirit.
It's got palm trees and a sandy beach and the pier. It's just a sunny little town on the coast, really.
In this sunny little town on the coast lives Sabrina Cooper. At 68, she's not long retired from her family business.
Sabrina Cooper ran a magic shop in Eastbourne for a number of years. She was the niece of Tommy Cooper, the comedian and magician.
Tommy Cooper was the most celebrated comedian and magician for a generation. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind that everyone within Eastbourne, and in fact throughout the whole country, would have known of the relationship between Sabrina Cooper and, of course, her very famous uncle.
Seeing the things in the magic shop, some of which looked quite intriguing.
And I remember the sign outside and all the painting, like I think it had a hat with a rabbit coming out and things like that.
Sabrina was very well liked. I mean, everybody in Eastbourne would have known the shop and probably been in it at some point and would have encountered a friendly woman who knew her stuff and was a well-known feature of the community.
She had more recently rented out that property to a burger company, but she remained living above it, and she was known around the cafes locally for always walking her dogs.
She had two dogs, Abra and Trix. Those two dogs were the love of her life. Sabrina was described by everyone who had met her as a kind, caring and loving lady. She would do any good deed for anyone. She was much loved within her family. She was a highly respected and much valued member of the community in Eastbourne.
For Sabrina, Christmas was a big time of the year. It was her favourite time of the year. And coming up to Christmas 2022 would have been a really important time for her.
Which was still to be in Eastbourne. She'd found a property that she wanted to move to. She was very excited to move out of the town centre and to have a quieter life.
But this festive season in Eastbourne will never be forgotten.
Shortly before 4 p.m, Sabrina's mother phoned Sabrina's daughter because she couldn't get hold of Sabrina on the telephone.
The daughter have tried to contact her mother several occasions till eventually she went round to the actual property. sitting by her side. It was a very, very chilling moment. On close inspection, she realised there was a large pool of blood on the floor, and her mother wasn't moving at all.
One of her arms was trapped beneath her body. It certainly wouldn't be something that you'd wish a daughter to find.
To find your mother in that state, or to find anybody in that
Her daughter came to realise at that specific moment, tragically, that her mother was dead.
Emergency services were called. Her mother had recently had a major operation. Initially, the fear was that she had injured herself and ruptured the stitches that
of life and confirmed that she had in fact died. They assumed as well that she had had a fall.
When the police arrived, that in fact this was not a sudden death, that something more sinister was afoot.
They, together with the paramedics, examined Sabrina, and it was immediately apparent on doing so that she had suffered stab wounds.
A number of puncture wounds had been found on Sabrina's abdomen.
This wasn't some form of tragic accident. It was obvious to the paramedics that this lady had been murdered.
Forensic investigators are called to Sabrina's home.
The first thing that the police would do in a crime scene is
preserve it as much as possible.
A scenes of crime officer would have attended with his team, and they would have checked for any form of forensic evidence, for any evidential clues that would assist them in their investigation. And of course, the key target was finding out who was responsible for this heinous crime.
Police need to consider if this is a burglary gone wrong.
Sabrina's purse was open. It looked like it'd been ransacked. There were no coins in there, there was no cash.
And there was a coin on the floor that they noticed, which they thought looked slightly out of place and odd.
Almost giving the impression that somebody had very quickly emptied the contents.
In fact, Sabrina's mother had given her a sum of money the day before. That money mysteriously was now missing.
But as officers continue to search the home,
First thing which is remarkable in this case is the police realised that there hadn't been a break-in. Nothing really had been ransacked, none of the windows had been smashed, the door locks were still secured. The evidence tends to suggest that it must have been someone who was known to this lady.
Sabrina was a single woman, but her daughter alerts the team to something else out of place.
It was rather odd because the table had been set for two people.
She noticed 2 used mugs in the sink.
There was a candle burning in the room. Just some really strange things that raised suspicions.
It's not long before news of a crime scene in the vicinity spreads.
I worked with a photographer in Eastbourne, and he found the scene there and took pictures. Straight away, we knew there was a scene, we knew it looked like a murder. was a murder inquiry.
When something particularly violent like a murder happens, there would have been shock across the whole town.
Somewhere along the line. So it would have affected most of the people in town.
And there would have been concerns that there appeared to be no apparent motive to it.
It is shocking to hear that, yeah. I mean, you wouldn't think that would happen to somebody who's just in the town running a shop.
There'd be uniformed police going door to door, trying to find anybody who saw or heard anything, and then looking for people to interview.
The priority of the police is to try and identify who was last in contact with Sabrina. Not necessarily because they're a suspect, but they are likely to be a relevant witness to help the police put together a timeline of what happened immediately before Sabrina's death. The police very soon afterwards were able to look at Sabrina's phone.
When the police checked Sabrina Cooper's phone, the first thing that they saw was there was a message from someone who was entered in her phone as Tony Friend.
There were 2 text messages, one asking her if she was okay, and the other saying, "On my way, see you in 10 minutes."
It was obviously their prime priority to find out who this individual was.
In Eastbourne, Sussex, the niece of the famous magician Tommy Cooper, 68-year-old Sabrina Cooper, has been found murdered in the hallway of her flat.
The post-mortem examination revealed that she had sustained 4 stab wounds. One of them had
Sabrina Cooper's right hand, so she was frantically trying to ward off that dreadful attack upon her. Whilst the pathologist had deemed that the causation of death was due to the stab wounds to the abdomen and chest, a really interesting factor in this case was that there was a small fracture to the larynx, and that had to be investigated as to whether in fact Sabrina Cooper had been strangled.
Whilst detectives tried to trace her mystery friend Tony, who texted Sabrina on the day she died, investigators pursue other leads.
There will be a number of golden but start to view CCTV to see if anybody's been to the address.
the police would approach local businesses, local residents who may have CCTV or Ring doorbell footage or anything of that nature to ensure that it is saved, so it is retained and can be downloaded for the police to use to piece together what had happened.
There was a camera looking towards Sabrina's house, and the footage of that became very important. It showed at 8:05 on the morning of the 18th, a man arriving at Sabrina's house. Four minutes later, at about 8:09, having been walking her two small dogs.
They'd seen him entering the property with her.
It was almost an hour later that he had left those premises, and when he left those premises, he was carrying a distinctive orange bag.
Given the information that the phone was telling police around Tony Friend, and Tony was expected to be there, saying, "I'll be there in 10 minutes," and a man arriving that can be seen on CCTV, it was a fair assumption there, of course, that It really becomes important to the inquiry to ascertain, you know, is it the same person? Is this man Tony Friend? Where is he now? And what information can be taken from him for the investigation?
On Sabrina's mobile phone, Tony is how he was saved in her contacts.
To ascertain who this number belonged to, the police obviously would have first checked with friends, associates of Sabrina Cooper, and then, of course, forensically, they would have examined the number.
If it is somebody that Sabrina knows, the chances are there'll be a social media contact there with Tony, whoever this Tony could be.
Investigators come up trumps with a Tony Sabrina had recently befriended on Facebook.
The photos on that account matched the person
as Tony King.
in the same way that the police would look at how Sabrina lived her life and who she was as a person. Finding the same about Tony was of utmost importance to the investigation. Tony would have been a priority for the investigation at that time.
Detectives discover the unassuming 60-year-old is in fact a budding internet celebrity.
$11,000 followers.
Tony's TikTok posts on social media portray him as the life and soul of the party.
Look at it! Yay!
Oh my God!
Go! Yay! Love them. This is the most best female beings I've met in a long time, with banter, communication, and humour. I'm not drunk.
He was continually and regularly posting stuff on social media. And this was rather interesting because Tony King was a loner. No real close
around Eastbourne.
He wasn't working and was in receipt of benefits.
He had a significant alcohol and drug problem as well.
Sabrina's family did not know very much about Tony King or their mother's relationship with him. They knew that she had a friend called Tony, who she had met, they thought, when she was out walking her dogs.
And Tony King had struck up a friendship or an acquaintanceship with her. Very casual friendship, no hint of any relationship, just a friendship. It's possible that she tried to help him, that she kind of felt sorry for him and would, you know, just be friendly with him. A good woman just being kind to someone she felt was down on his luck.
It seems Tony also shares Sabrina's love of magic.
Here's your trick. But happy Halloween, and yeah, here's your treat. I've got. Pull it out of my mouth. Happy Halloween.
The day before she died.
What was found was clearly a text conversation arranging to meet, and it was planned the following day to come and help Sabrina pack up her boxes prior to moving.
Tony was arranging to come round and help. He was going to help lift the boxes. As far as we can tell, she was certainly preparing for somebody to come to the flat and help her with the move, and had laid out the table for two. So she knew him well enough to invite him in and make him a cup of tea. Because of the nature of the messages, with Tony saying that he was going to be round in 10 minutes, he may well have been the last person to see her alive.
As investigators review the audio from the surveillance footage of Tony arriving, something catches their attention.
When the police looked at the CCTV, we were also able to establish that he had actually said as he arrived the words, "Get in, get in." The words were said with some force and some meaning. It was obvious, even listening to those words, that one could almost infer what his intention was.
What detectives
shattering video the day before the killing. Tony King had posted a video with a chilling message.
Watch out.
In the seaside town of Eastbourne, Sussex, pensioner Sabrina Cooper has been found murdered in her flat. Police identified Tony King leaving the house on CCTV and find an ominous TikTok the influencer posts. The night before the killing.
Watch out for my next magic trick.
The police, having watched the TikTok on which Tony King said, "Watch out for my next magic trick," immediately made the connection with Sabrina Cooper owning a magic shop, and indeed her uncle being Tommy Cooper.
Having been able to identify an address, the next part obviously would be to arrest Tony King.
Run.
And at 2:35 that morning, Tony King was arrested on suspicion of murdering Sabrina.
First initial denial, he really hadn't anything to say about it. He hadn't formulated a story. He was caught.
He explained to the police that he did know Sabrina, he had had contact, but didn't understand what was happening because, in his words, he'd been smoking spliffs all evening and didn't understand what had happened to Sabrina.
He was later brought to the police station. He was interviewed. Tony King had a solicitor present. The solicitor was given the basics of the incident and given what's called pre-interview disclosure. He was being advised what the strength of the case was against him at that time.
As detectives start to interview their suspect, news of the arrest spreads across Eastbourne.
As a reporter, you're not party to a lot of what goes on behind the scenes, but we go and start knocking doors ourselves to find out what we can about him and his relationship with Sabrina. We found it very hard to find anybody who knew anything about Tony King. It wasn't difficult to find people who knew Sabrina. She was a well-known person in the community, but he really was a loner and nobody really knew anything about him. The most information we got about him was through his own social media.
It's about 1 a.m. in the morning. I've actually just woke up. I've had a wee.
Tony King's property.
As soon as the police attended Tony King's address, that too became a crime scene.
They searched his home address and found a bloodied knife under his mattress in an orange carrier bag.
The importance of the police finding that orange bag was that it was the very same bag that they'd seen in the CCTV where the suspect had left the house 1 hour later after entering it.
They also found his coat, which had blood on it, and a number of items belonging to Sabrina Cooper in the pocket.
They found a set of keys. Those set of keys were the very same keys that Sabrina Cooper had reported to her daughter had been missing 2 weeks prior.
And in terms of Tony's clothing, there was clothing in the washing machine and in his bedroom, which again appeared to have blood on it and matched the CCTV images of the person seen leaving early that day. Finding a knife with blood on, finding clothes with blood on, all of those had huge relevance to the investigation.
The bloodied items are seized by investigators and sent off to the lab for analysis.
What the police will be looking for and hoping for is confirmation that that is Sabrina's blood. The forensic results that began to come back showed that the blood on the knife was Sabrina's blood.
In terms of major DNA findings, Sabrina's blood was found on Tony King's clothes. His DNA also had been found in her purse, which ultimately revealed, of course, that he had taken cash from Sabrina Cooper.
As scenes of crime officers continue to sweep Sabrina's home, more evidence is uncovered.
Inside Sabrina's address, there were blood marks there.
They had tested various areas within the flat, including Sabrina Cooper's handbag and a filing cabinet, and Tony King's blood was found in both of those locations.
Detectives surmise that King must have cut himself on the knife while at the scene. Back at HQ, they confront him with their incriminating evidence.
In the police interview, the police would have been trying to establish what had happened, what he accepted had happened, whether he was involved, or whether he was going to answer any questions at all. In the police interview, Tony King accepted that he had gone to Sabrina Cooper's house that morning. He accepted that he had a knife with him.
Tony King said that he'd had an altercation with another neighbour and that he had that knife on him for personal protection reasons. And at that specific time, Tony King admitted that he indeed was responsible for the killing of Sabrina Cooper.
But maintained he had no intention of stabbing her when he got there, and he didn't in fact know and couldn't explain why he had. He explained in the interview that he did stab her as they went into the property, but he didn't know why and hadn't planned it.
Effectively, that meant that the police could sharpen up their investigation. There was no need to trace other suspects. They, in fact, knew at that specific time that they had the right man.
Behind-the-scenes investigators also uncover Tony King's criminal history.
He had several previous convictions, but going back some years. The only notable conviction of concern was a conviction for being involved. Once Tony King had confessed to the killing of Sabrina Cooper, within 48 hours, Tony King appeared before the Crown Court, having first of all attended the Magistrates' Court. He was charged with an offence of murder.
He didn't look like a person of any real significance at all, which again is not uncommon. But he didn't look nervous, maybe a bit in shock, but not particularly nervous. Didn't look particularly dangerous, but you know, you can never tell.
At the Crown Court, there was then a plea and trial preparation hearing, which is the hearing at which a defendant is expected to enter a plea. At that hearing, he entered a not guilty plea.
Lewis Power, KC, heads up Tony King's defence team.
My first impressions of Tony King were that he was a rather complicated individual. And it was clear that he had to be seen by a psychiatrist, because having accepted that he was responsible for the killing of Sabrina Cooper, the next step in the criminal process was to ascertain whether he had a psychiatric defence to the offence of murder.
In Eastbourne, Sussex, 60-year-old Tony King has been charged with the murder of 68-year-old Sabrina Cooper after confessing to stabbing her. As police and the prosecution start preparing for a trial, his barrister begins to draw up his defence.
It was our task to assess whether in fact he had any defence to murder, bearing in mind the psychiatric defences which were applicable. We had to look initially to see if there was any abnormality of mind present, so that he could avail himself of what's called the defence of diminished responsibility. It was very difficult when I of discussing the evidence in the case, extremely cold in terms of what had happened to Sabrina Cooper, and wasn't very excitable, nor indeed did he show any emotion. We instructed an eminent expert, Dr. Christine Tizard, a forensic consultant psychologist, to assess whether in fact there was something at play here that we could utilise in his defence at trial.
And from that point, it was a matter of setting up an assessment of Mr. King. It was during COVID, so this was done remotely. Bit of incredulity in the back of my head, thinking, wow, is this man capable of this? But very soon into the interview, I sensed a volatileness under the surface. There was something very different and eerie about him. He approached everything as if the world owed him a favour. He came across as
of his childhood. Tony King came from a broken home. He spent a large amount of his young life in various care homes and progressed to Borstal and short periods of imprisonment.
He'd disclosed during his assessment that when he was a 9-year-old boy, he'd beaten another child senseless with a ball bearing for no apparent reason. He'd been violent to other children when he was a younger man. And his justification for that was that actually he didn't matter, nobody took him seriously.
I believe that that bitterness manifested itself into his adult life, and he remained bitter.
I've come into a lot of questions now. What do you want for Christmas, Tony? That's a big question. What do I want for Christmas? Well, this is what I want for Christmas. I want everybody to stop treating everybody like it's on their fucking shoe.
It was in a sense just a rant of unfairness. I think Mr. King disliked anybody and everybody, he had a massive chip on his shoulder.
He felt that the world had turned.
King's motive for Sabrina's murder.
I think Mr. King was a man that had never made it, was jealous of people, fancied himself with skills, such as if you've seen his TikTok with his guitar and with his magic.
Pull it out of my mouth.
And perhaps that was an attraction to him, that here is Sabrina with a magic shop and the connections to her uncle, Tommy Cooper. In his own view. He had a huge anger problem that he admitted to, and it would appear that he was just waiting for the right person for that anger to come out on, and it was essentially
at life. It didn't provide any explanation as to why any anger would be directed at Sabrina, but she was a successful woman who was happy with her family and home life, moving on to a new future.
I was very, very clear in my report that there was absolutely no case for diminished responsibility whatsoever. There was an underlying personality disorder, but Mr. King was fully aware of what he is doing.
I think I can sum it up on this basis, that her firm expert opinion was that Tony King wasn't mad, Tony King was bad.
More evidence is uncovered to support Dr. Tizard's conclusions.
When the police interrogated Tony King's mobile phone, they found an on-sent TikTok video. That video had the words, "I took a life today." In my mind, that showed that there was definite premeditation and planning involved in the killing. Tony King, on being confronted with the conclusion that there was no psychiatric defense available, had a stark choice as to whether he wished to continue to contest the trial or whether he wished to plead guilty. Almost immediately, Tony King gave instructions to us that he wanted an end to this matter and he wanted to plead guilty to the offence of murder.
Guilty to murder.
When Tony King appeared at a sentencing hearing, he did not utter one. Apologized once. It was chilling.
The court hears details of King's actions leading up to the murder.
In my view, that he was trying to sensationalize what was about to happen. He wanted to be the center of attention. He wanted to be as famous as Sabrina Cooper's uncle, the famous magician and comedian Tommy Cooper. He wanted to go down in history as someone who had committed this heinous act. Tony King had sent a message to Sabrina Cooper with an emoji saying, "I'll be round later." The emoji was that of an angel. How ironic it was that the following day, he was the angel of death.
The court hears how Tony King was lying in wait outside Sabrina's home.
Having entered the address with Sabrina, no conversation happened, according to him.
And that anger and rage erupted. And unfortunately, that was meted out towards an innocent woman.
He then stabbed Sabrina to death.
An hour later, Tony King leaves with the £100 of cash he's stolen from Sabrina's purse. Then he makes his next calculating step.
Tony King sent a message to Sabrina Cooper saying, "Hope you're okay, girl, call you later, kiss." And the inference was that he was trying to suggest through that message that he didn't know that she was dead.
This, in fact, in our view, showed that the offence was premeditated and that Tony King was covering his tracks.
From Tony King's phone.
Tony King is finally sentenced to a minimum of 23 years.
Effectively means that he wouldn't be eligible for parole until he's in his 80s. He's going to die in prison.
There was a sense that justice had been served in the end.
I could nearly feel a lump in my throat, looking across at the faces of the Cooper family, the sadness. This was the loss of their mother, their daughter, their sister. It was completely meaningless and completely tragic. It's a sensational loss, not just for her family, but for the whole community.